Sarah Martinez walked into the crowded American Legion Hall with her head held high, despite the whispers that followed her everywhere she went. At 28, she was one of the youngest female veterans in their small Colorado town, and her chest displayed an array of military decorations that made even seasoned soldiers take a second look. The monthly veterans gathering was supposed to be a place of camaraderie and support, but for Sarah, it had become something else entirely. She could feel the familiar weight of suspicious stares as she made her way to an empty chair near the back of the room. The Bronze Star Medal with Valor device caught the fluorescent light, along with her Purple Heart, Combat Action Badge, and several campaign ribbons that told the story of her 2 tours in Afghanistan. "There she goes again," muttered Frank Thompson, a grizzled Vietnam veteran whose own chest bore the scars of a different war. His voice carried further than he intended, and several heads turned in Sarah's direction. "Wearing those fancy medals like she's some kind of war hero." The comment stung, but Sarah had learned to keep her expression neutral. She had been dealing with this for months now, ever since she had moved to Pine Ridge after her medical retirement from the Army. The doubt, the skepticism, the outright accusations that someone like her couldn't possibly have earned such distinguished honors. Margaret Wellesley, the wife of a retired Air Force colonel, leaned over to her neighbor with barely concealed disdain. "I've never seen a young woman with so many medals. In my day, women weren't even allowed in combat positions. How could she have earned a Bronze Star?" The room's attention gradually shifted toward Sarah as more veterans noticed the brewing controversy. Some looked curious, others appeared openly hostile. The monthly speaker, a representative from the VA, tried to continue his presentation about new benefits programs, but the energy in the room had changed. "I'm telling you, something's not right about her story," Frank continued, his voice growing louder and more confident as he gained an audience. "I've been to war, and I know what it takes to earn those decorations. She looks like she should be working in some office, not carrying a rifle in Afghanistan." Sarah's hands clenched slightly in her lap, but she forced herself to remain calm. She thought about that night in Kandahar province when her convoy had been ambushed. The memory of explosions, gunfire, and the weight of her wounded squad leader as she dragged him to safety was as vivid as ever. The shrapnel wound in her left shoulder still ached on cold mornings, a permanent reminder of the price she had paid for those medals. "Maybe someone should ask to see her DD-214, suggested another veteran from across the room. The DD-214 was the official military discharge document that would verify her service record and decorations. "I bet you'd find some interesting discrepancies there." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Sarah felt her face flush with a mixture of anger and humiliation. She had sacrificed 3 years of her life, her health, and nearly her sanity serving her country. She had watched friends die and had barely survived herself, yet here she was being treated like a fraud by the very people who should have understood her sacrifice. "You know what I think?" Frank stood up now, addressing the entire room. "I think we've got ourselves a stolen valor case right here. Some wannabe soldier who bought herself a uniform and some medals online, thinking she could fool us old-timers." The accusation of stolen valor was perhaps the most serious charge that could be leveled against a veteran. It was a federal crime to falsely claim military honors, and in the veteran community, it was considered one of the most despicable acts imaginable. The room erupted in murmurs and heated discussions as people chose sides. Sarah finally stood, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "I earned every one of these medals," she said simply. "I served with the 10th Mountain Division in Afghanistan from 2019 to 2021. I was a combat medic attached to an infantry company." "Sure you were," Frank scoffed. "And I suppose you single-handedly took down a Taliban stronghold to earn that Bronze Star?" "She's probably never even been outside the United States," added Margaret, her voice dripping with contempt. "These young people today think they can just pretend to be heroes." The VA representative had given up trying to continue his presentation and was now watching the confrontation with obvious discomfort. Other veterans in the room were taking sides, some defending Sarah's right to be heard, others joining in the chorus of doubt and suspicion. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a worn leather folder. I have my DD-214 right here if anyone wants to verify my service, she said, holding up the document that contained her official military record. Those can be faked too, Frank declared dismissively. You can buy anything online these days. What we need is someone who actually knows about military regulations and can spot a fake when they see one. The tension in the room continued to escalate as more veterans joined the argument. Some demanded that Sarah prove her legitimacy, while others argued that she deserved the benefit of the doubt. The monthly meeting had completely derailed into a trial by combat, with Sarah as the unwilling defendant. I know what real combat looks like, shouted Bill Patterson, a Gulf War veteran. And I'm telling you, that girl doesn't have the look of someone who's been through hell and back. Sarah felt increasingly isolated as the voices around her grew more hostile. She thought about leaving, about walking out and never coming back to another veterans meeting. But something inside her refused to give up. She had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to let these accusations stand unchallenged. The confrontation reached a crescendo when Frank approached Sarah directly, pointing at her bronze star. You want to know what I think about your fancy medal collection? I think you're a disgrace to everyone who actually served. You're spitting on the graves of real soldiers who died earning these honors. The room fell silent at the harshness of his words. Even some of Frank's supporters seemed taken aback by the venom in his accusation. Sarah stood her ground, meeting his gaze with quiet dignity despite the tears that threatened to fall. I know what I did over there, she said softly. I know the price I paid and the friends I lost. Whether you believe me or not doesn't change what happened. Just as Frank opened his mouth to respond with what would certainly be another devastating attack on Sarah's character, the main door to the hall opened with a loud bang. The argument stopped mid-sentence as every head in the room turned toward the entrance. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the suddenly quiet hall as a figure in dress uniform approached the gathering. The authoritative presence commanded immediate attention, and Sarah felt her heart race as she recognized the approaching silhouette. The room held its collective breath as everyone waited to see who had arrived at this most crucial moment. The footsteps grew closer, and Sarah could see the glint of stars on the newcomer's shoulders. Her mouth went dry as she realized that their small-town controversy was about to take an unexpected turn that would change everything. Lieutenant General Robert Crawford stepped into the American Legion Hall with the bearing of a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers across multiple combat deployments. At 55, his silver hair was perfectly trimmed beneath his service cap, and his dress uniform displayed nearly 4 decades of distinguished military service. The 3 stars on his shoulders caught the light as he surveyed the room with sharp, intelligent eyes. The silence was deafening. Every veteran in the hall recognized the significance of those 3 stars, representing one of the Army's most senior officers. General Crawford's reputation preceded him wherever he went, a combat veteran who had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and numerous other deployments, earning respect from soldiers of every rank. Frank Thompson's mouth fell open as he realized he was in the presence of military royalty. Margaret Wellesley gripped her purse tighter, suddenly feeling very small in her folding chair. The entire room seemed to shrink around the general's commanding presence as he walked purposefully through the crowd. Good evening, General Crawford said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command. I apologize for interrupting your meeting, but I was driving through town and saw the American Legion sign. I thought I'd stop in and pay my respects to my fellow veterans. The VA representative stumbled forward, clearly starstruck. General Crawford, sir, this is an incredible honor. We had no idea you were in the area. I'm visiting some old friends in Colorado Springs, the general explained, his eyes scanning the room and taking in the tense atmosphere. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to meet with local veterans. His gaze settled on Sarah, and she noticed a flicker of recognition cross his features. Frank, trying to recover from his shock, stepped forward with false bravado. General, sir, I'm Frank Thompson, Vietnam veteran. We were actually dealing with a situation here that might interest you. We have concerns about stolen valor, and given your experience, perhaps you could help us sort this out. General Crawford's expression grew serious as he looked between Frank and Sarah. Stolen valor is indeed a serious matter. What exactly seems to be the problem? Well, sir, Frank continued, emboldened by what he perceived as the general's interest, we have a young woman here claiming to have earned a Bronze Star with Valor device, among other decorations. Some of us find her claims rather questionable, given her age and appearance. The general's eyes moved to Sarah, taking in her uniform and decorations with the practiced eye of someone who had personally presented thousands of awards throughout his career. And what is your name, soldier? Former Sergeant Sarah Martinez, sir. 10th Mountain Division, medic assigned to Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment. Her voice was steady despite the emotional turmoil of the past hour. General Crawford nodded slowly, 10th Mountain Division. I know that unit well. When did you serve with them? 2 deployments to Afghanistan, sir. 2019 to 2020, then 2020 to 2021. I was medically retired after my second tour. Something in the general's expression shifted as Sarah provided these details. He studied her face more carefully, and a look of dawning recognition appeared in his eyes. Sergeant Martinez, he said slowly. Were you the medic involved in the convoy ambush near Kandahar in September 2021? The room was absolutely silent now. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Yes, sir. That's correct. General Crawford turned to address the entire room, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you about Sergeant Sarah Martinez and why she wears that Bronze Star with Valor device. Frank's confident expression began to falter as he realized this was not going according to his plan. On September 15, 2021, the general continued, Sergeant Martinez was part of a convoy returning from a medical mission when they were ambushed by Taliban fighters using improvised explosive devices and small arms fire. The convoy was trapped in a kill zone with multiple casualties. The room hung on every word as General Crawford painted the scene. Under heavy enemy fire, Sergeant Martinez left the relative safety of her vehicle to treat wounded soldiers. When her squad leader was critically injured by shrapnel, she dragged him 60 meters through open terrain while enemy rounds impacted all around her. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as the general recounted the events that had haunted her dreams for months afterward. But that wasn't the end of it, General Crawford continued. When Taliban fighters began advancing on their position, Sergeant Martinez took up her squad leader's rifle and held the line until reinforcements arrived. She was wounded by shrapnel during the engagement but continued to provide medical aid to her fellow soldiers until the last casualty was evacuated. The general's voice grew stronger as he reached the climax of the story. Her actions that day saved the lives of 4 American soldiers and prevented the capture of sensitive medical supplies that could have been used against our forces. Frank Thompson looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Margaret Wellesley had gone pale, staring at Sarah with a mixture of shock and shame. I know this, General Crawford said, turning back to Sarah with a slight smile, because I was the commanding general who personally recommended her for the Bronze Star with Valor device. I also signed the orders for her Purple Heart and Combat Action Badge. The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. The very person who had the authority to verify or deny Sarah's decorations had just provided unshakable testimony to their legitimacy. Furthermore, the general continued, his tone growing stern as he addressed Frank and the other skeptics, Sergeant Martinez's service record is exemplary. She volunteered for combat duty as a medic, one of the most dangerous jobs in the military. She put her life on the line repeatedly to save others, and she bears both visible and invisible scars from her service to this country. Frank tried to speak, but no words came out. The man who had been so vocal in his accusations now stood speechless before the undeniable truth. General Crawford moved to stand beside Sarah, placing a paternal hand on her shoulder. This young woman represents the very best of our military. She embodies the courage, dedication, and selfless service that we expect from our soldiers. Anyone who questions her honor without cause does a disservice to all who wear the uniform. The room erupted in spontaneous applause as the full weight of the situation sank in. Veterans who had been skeptical moments before now looked ashamed of their doubts. Those who had defended Sarah felt vindicated, while others simply clapped for a fellow soldier who had proven herself under the most extreme circumstances. "I owe you an apology," Frank said quietly, approaching Sarah with his head down. "I was wrong to doubt you. I let my own prejudices cloud my judgment." Margaret Wellesley also approached, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, dear. I had no right to question your service. Thank you for what you did over there." One by one, the other veterans who had harbored doubts came forward to apologize and thank Sarah for her service. The atmosphere in the room had completely transformed from hostility to respect and admiration. General Crawford watched the reconciliation with satisfaction before addressing the group one final time. "This is what our veteran community should look like, supporting one another, recognizing sacrifice regardless of age or gender, and standing together as brothers and sisters who served." As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself surrounded by veterans who wanted to hear more about her experiences and offer their support. The American Legion Hall had gone from being a place of humiliation to one of acceptance and camaraderie. General Crawford approached Sarah before leaving. "Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of your service," he said quietly. "You earned every decoration you wear, and you should wear them with pride." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I was beginning to doubt myself." "Never doubt your worth as a soldier or as a person," the general said firmly. "You've proven yourself in ways that most people never will. Hold your head high." As General Crawford left the hall, Sarah looked around at her fellow veterans with new eyes. The room that had felt so hostile an hour ago now felt like home. Frank Thompson approached her one more time, extending his hand. "I hope you'll give an old fool another chance," he said sincerely. "I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee and hear about your service, if you're willing." Sarah shook his hand with a genuine smile. "I'd like that, Frank. We all have stories to tell." The meeting officially ended, but many veterans lingered to continue conversations that had been impossible just hours before. Sarah realized that while the confrontation had been painful, it had ultimately led to something better, genuine understanding and acceptance within her veteran community. Walking out of the American Legion Hall that night, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. Her medals caught the streetlight one final time, but now they felt like what they had always been meant to be, symbols of honor, courage, and service that connected her to a proud tradition of American heroes. The whispers that had followed her for so long would be replaced by stories of respect and admiration, all because a three-star general had entered the room at exactly the right moment to set the record straight.